If you found this video, maybe you have recently purchased a Lee Progressive Pro 1000, or maybe you're contemplating buying this press. Maybe you have bought the press and in the setup process you have come across some issues that you need some solutions to. So I'm going to take a few minutes and go through the issues that I had and how I resolved them, and maybe my mistakes won't be your mistakes. So when I first set up this press, my number one problem that I had right off the bat was with this depriming die here. And what I found was when I raised a case into that die, it would get to about this point right here and my case would stick in the die. As I would lower it down, the shell plate and this apparatus here would stay lodged up in here where it was stuck, and this ram would fall back down and disconnect from this piece right here. So first and foremost, I'm not real sure what worked, but the way I relieved it was I took this die and I readjusted it. I set it up initially the way that the directions had told me and what other videos had told me. What I found was I had to back it out. Once I backed it out, it seemed to start working. Another thing I did at the advice of a friend of mine was to take some degreaser and degrease this ram here. So of course when I had it up here and it was stuck and this disconnected, it would fall down as I would cycle my handle. So I took some degreaser and I degreased that. Another thing I did, once I did that, it did disconnect. I had to adjust a set screw that holds this plate to this ram, and I'll show you that in just a second. But adjusting that set screw, I think really helped that ram hold on to that. But one bit of advice is that set screw is don't over tighten it. When you feel like you're fixing to get to a point where you're fixing to over tighten it, stop. You want it snug, but you don't want to over tighten it because it can strip out. It is cast aluminum. Although it's difficult to see, the set screw that attaches the ram to the shell plate is located to the right of the spring that holds your carrier on, that takes your shell and puts it into the shell plate. But I'll point to it right here. It just takes a simple Allen key, and what you do is you lower your ram back onto that if you have that problem, and you tighten it up at that point. Again, don't over tighten this because this will strip out very easily. So my second biggest issue with this press when I set it up was this priming system that they have here. And this priming system is tedious to say the least, but once you get a hang of it, it's really not that bad. One of the most important things I'll say is the fact that you have to keep this whole area clean of powder. So if you see that above that is your powder measure and your powder system, as you cycle it drops, sometimes it drops some powder down into this area, and of course where there's powder a primer will not feed. So you've got to make sure that you keep it very well good and clean. I'll show you how I do that in just a second, but the fact is this system, as you cycle it, this shakes just enough to where it causes your primers that are sitting in this area to fall and feed down into this area right here, and the gravity of those primers keep those primers flowing. If you ever get to the point where you don't have enough primers in here and you don't have that weight pushing down, and it gets to about this point right here, you can look in the tray and those primers are not there from here up, then you're going to have issues with them not feeding correctly. So you'll cycle and you'll get a primer that seats sideways into your shell casing, and when you do set a primer sideways and you go to work this lever, your shell plate's not going to rotate correctly. So let me show you how the best way I have found to keep that primer tunnel or funnel or whatever you want to call it cleaned out. So the most effective method of keeping that primer position cleaned out is to use compressed air or of some sort. You can go to Walmart, get some of that compressed air that they sell in the electronics department to keep your keyboards from your computer clean, or you can simply go to the hardware section and get you an adapter like I've got here. So this is connected to my air hose, which obviously is connected to my compressor, and this is the little adapter here that you use to fill up a football or a basketball. So what I've got is I got attached, and before I use the machine and before I connect my primer mechanism up, I'll go ahead and blow that thing out. Any little powder or debris that's in there is going to blow it out. So same thing can be done with compressed air, but I suggest having one on hand because you will use it very often, or at least I do. So another big issue I was having when I started setting up this press is I had a load that my charge was for 6.4 grains of powder, And I was getting anywhere from 5.3 up to 7.5 grains every time I cycled this press. I got very inconsistent powder charges. What I found was I had set this up incorrectly. So make sure, just a tip, just make sure when you set this up that this, when the handle is all the way in the up position as this is, that this comes all the way to the very end of this piece right here. They've got they're almost flush as they cycle. One of the ways that you do that is with this chain, and what I found was this chain was too loose. When I set it up, I went by some of the videos and some of the advice which were correct that said that you want just a slight compression on the chain spring at the bottom. I'm going to show you the chain spring that I'm talking about. So the chain spring is at the bottom right here. And there's the chain spring right there that's coming into view. So you want some compression on that. Well, my problem was I did not have enough compression on it. I had it mildly compressed, and it wasn't allowing that powder disc to actuate all the way to the rear to fill up the powder or to get a consistent charge. So with the handle all the way up as it is, you should be able to push it, and you should be able to get a little bit of compression like that. And you let off, you should have just a slight amount of compression as well. So make sure that you have enough compression on your spring in order to actuate. So looking at it, you see how tight that chain is, and it goes up there. I didn't really know how to route this, so the way I've got it works for me is I've got it routed from the back side of this coming through and down, going back down that other side, and you see that's the running end that just kind of hangs freely there. So that's another tip I can give you. Make sure that your chain is tight, and once you actuate that handle all the way up, you've got enough compression on that spring. The next piece of advice I'm going to give you is if you ever work your ram and you feel any type of sudden stoppage or you feel some type of resistance, you stop what you're doing immediately. And normally what I have found is with this particular ram or loader, as you work your handle, a lot of times if you watch here, this thing will drop a case, and it didn't do it that time, but a lot of times it will bounce forward just a little bit, because once it hits that little plate, it will bounce just a touch. And what that does is, as you raise your ram, let me go ahead and simulate that. As you raise your ram, that case that bounced a little bit into the way will hit that frame of this press, and it will not let it go up anymore. So the way you fix that is you'll bring it down, and you'll just get rid of those cases. Just go ahead and get them out of the way. All right, you want to also check this case if that was maybe at your number 2 position. Make sure, because you're not going to get powder in it, because the case activates the powder lever, so you'll want to take that case out and just start the whole process again. So I'm going to work the press, and it will go into where it should go. Now this is a good example of what happens. If you don't have your shell plate and battery, it's not going to go forward. So it's easily movable with your shell plate. Just take it, twist it, and now it's in battery. So you should be able to put that case where it belongs and work it just as normal. Well, that's a good example. So if you look, exactly what I said will happen did happen. As I worked my handle, this case fell down, hit that little ramp, and it bounced a little bit into the way of this ram, so it won't raise. So you could take that case and just push it back up in there, as I just did, and you should be able to work it just fine. So again, same thing. I don't know why this press is having that problem, but that case just fell right in the way again. So that's a prime example, and I'm glad it worked out where I could show you that you've got to pay attention to what you're doing. And a lot of times these cases will fall and bounce into the way, and it will cause the binding. Another thing I'll tell you, that if that's not the case and you're still binding, is to take a look at your primers, because sometimes the second reason this thing will bind is a primer will get flipped in that position, and you'll have to clear that primer out. A lot of times what will cause them to flip is if you don't have enough primers up here, or you've let it get down below here and the gravity is not pushing it down. But the second reason will be that you've got some powder down in there that you've got to blow it out. So first thing you want to check is your case, and then if your case is not your culprit, you want to go back over to your prime feed system and go ahead and clean it out, blow it out, make sure you don't have any flip primers in there. hopefully this has been beneficial to you, especially if you've had the same issues and little problems I've had with this press. One thing I will say is once I got it figured out, it has been a great press, and I have reloaded no telling how many rounds with it. So if you have any comments, please drop them below, especially if you got any fixes to the ongoing problems I'm having as far as the cases bouncing on my feed ramp or whatever else. But I appreciate you watching.